Undercover millionaire orders steak. Waitress slips him a note that stops him cold. He walked into his own luxury steakhouse dressed like trash, thrift store jacket, scuffed boots, a wool cap pulled low. The hostess sneered, shoved him into the corner near the kitchen, certain he couldn't pay. Then he did the unthinkable. He ordered the $500 Emperor's cut steak, with the cheapest beer on the menu. Laughter rippled across the room. The staff whispered, betting he'd skip the bill. They didn't know the truth. The man in rags was the billionaire owner of the entire empire, worth nearly $10 billion. But this wasn't about money. This was a test. A trap. Ethan Caldwell had come undercover to see who treated strangers with respect. And that's when she appeared. Claire, tired eyes, cracked shoes, hands trembling as she poured his drink. Unlike the others, she didn't mock him. She didn't sneer. She spoke softly, kindly, like he mattered. And then, while the manager's eyes burned from across the bar, she placed a folded napkin by his plate. 4 words, scrawled in ink, that made the billionaire's blood run cold. They're watching. The kitchen is unsafe. Why would a waitress risk her job, and her life, to warn a man she thought was broke? And what poison was hiding inside the empire's walls? Quick question before we dive in. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And hey, if you're curious already, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. Alright, let's jump in. The Sterling Ox stood on Michigan Avenue like a monument to excess, its brass doors polished to a mirror sheen, its windows glowing with the amber light of crystal chandeliers. Outside, tourists gawked at the luxury cars pulling up to the valet, where men in tuxedos ushered the city's elite into Ethan Caldwell's empire. But the man approaching the entrance didn't fit the picture. His jeans sagged at the knees, worn pale from years of washing. The flannel shirt hung loose on his frame, patched elbows fraying into threads. A thrift store jacket 2 sizes too big weighed on his shoulders. Ethan adjusted the wool cap over his graying hair and kept his gaze low, shuffling as if he were too tired to stand tall. To the world, he looked like a man scraping together enough change for a cheap diner meal. Inside, the hostess's smile faltered as soon as she looked him up and down. Her manicured hand hovered over the reservation book. "Sir, this is a fine dining establishment. The Sterling Ox has a dress code." Ethan lifted his eyes, the gray sharp beneath the disguise of humility. "Table for 1. Her smile thinned into disdain. She flicked her gaze toward the maitre d', hoping for backup. But she didn't recognize him, not as the billionaire owner worth nearly $10 billion, the chairman of Blackwood Holdings, nor as the man whose fortune spanned energy, technology, real estate, and luxury brands. To her, he was trash on the marble floor. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere, affordable," she suggested. Ethan didn't flinch. "I'll take the best table you've got." The maitre d' sighed, clearly annoyed, but seated him in a dim corner near the kitchen doors, a place where the smell of grease and clattering plates undercut the restaurant's elegance. Other diners in suits and glittering gowns barely concealed their smirks. Ethan settled into the chair, hands folded calmly. He had lived this scene many times before. Disguised as less than what he was, he came to his own establishments to study people, their kindness or cruelty, their real faces when they thought no one of consequence was watching. Wealth had insulated him for decades, surrounding him with sycophants and liars. But here, in threadbare clothes, he could measure hearts. A waitress approached, pen tucked behind her ear, notepad in hand. She looked younger than most of the diners, maybe 24, with chestnut hair escaping a loose bun. The half-moon shadows under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Her shoes were cracked at the soles, the black polish worn to gray. The apron strings at her waist frayed like an unraveling rope. Yet her smile was gentle, unforced. "Good evening. My name's Claire. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Ethan studied her a bit longer than necessary. He was used to pitying looks or sharp dismissal. She offered neither. Just tired warmth. "I'll have the cheapest beer on the menu," he said. She jotted the order without hesitation. "Of course. And for dinner?" He closed the menu deliberately, letting the leather-bound cover snap shut. The $500 Emperor's cut steak. Medium rare. And the $85 Bordeaux. Claire blinked, lips parting slightly, but caught herself before she could protest. Other servers might have rolled their eyes, maybe laughed at the absurdity of a man in rags ordering luxury he couldn't possibly afford. She only nodded. "Very well. I'll get that started." Her professionalism was armor, but Ethan saw the tremor in her hand as she collected the menu. He saw how her shoes pressed too tightly against her feet, how the skin at her knuckles was raw from endless washing. She was exhausted, worn thin, but still she carried herself with dignity. When she left, Ethan let his gaze wander. Laughter and clinking glasses echoed across the room. A politician he recognized sat 2 tables over, his hand too familiar on a woman's thigh. At another, a hedge fund manager berated his server for not pouring the wine quickly enough. The sterling ox was opulence, but it was also theater, the wealthy playing their roles, and the staff forced into silence. Halfway through the meal, as the Emperor's cut steak steamed before him, Ethan noticed Claire linger at his table longer than necessary. She refilled his water, though the glass was nearly full. She adjusted the silverware. Then, with a glance toward the bar where the manager stood watching, she leaned closer and placed a folded napkin near his plate. "Careful, it's hot," she said, her voice steady though her eyes flickered with urgency. Ethan touched the napkin casually, as though wiping his fingers. Inside, her handwriting curved in sharp strokes. "They're watching. The kitchen is unsafe. Check Mallory's ledger." For the first time in years, Ethan's pulse jumped. This was no plea for charity, no request for money from a supposed millionaire in disguise. It was a warning. A whistle blown in ink and silence. Ethan froze with a napkin crumpled in his palm, realizing his experiment to test kindness had uncovered something far darker. Why would a waitress risk everything to warn a stranger? While Ethan reeled, Claire moved swiftly back toward the kitchen. Her face betrayed nothing to the guests, but inside, her stomach knotted. Victor Mallory's eyes were on her, the manager with a slick smile and venomous temper. He had warned her before, one misstep, and her brother would pay the price. Yet tonight, desperation had pushed her past fear. Behind the kitchen doors, the stench of rancid meat clung to the air, masked with spices but unmistakable to anyone who cared to notice. Claire had noticed. She had seen the shipments arrive from a shuttered plant across the state line, boxes stamped with falsified labels. She had signed papers under Mallory's command, papers she knew were lies. And the $5,000 debt he claimed she owed ensured her silence. Except silence was killing her. In her locker at home, 3 hospital bills waited unopened. Liam's lungs required constant medication, oxygen support, and experimental treatments. $300,000 a year, and rising. She had given up her own dreams, sold her textbooks, and traded her college years for double shifts under Mallory's thumb. But if the contaminated meat sickened someone, if the FDA discovered the fraud, she would be destroyed along with him. So she had slipped the napkin to the one man in the room who looked like he might care. At his corner table, Ethan kept his expression blank, though his mind churned. Mallory's ledger. He knew the name. Victor Mallory had been hired 5 years earlier, a manager praised for efficiency and charm. Ethan had seen his reports, neat and profitable, too neat perhaps. He had ignored his COO Richard's warnings that margins were suspiciously high, that supply chain costs didn't add up. Now, the truth glared at him in hurried ink. Ethan chewed the steak slowly, his disguise intact. The marbling melted across his tongue, but suddenly he tasted only rot. If Claire was right, the kitchen was a danger, the ledger a vault of corruption. And this empire he had built, the fortune worth $10 billion, might be feeding poison to the very people who trusted it. If you were sitting in Ethan's chair, Would you confront Claire right away, or pretend nothing happened until you had proof? What would you do if a stranger risked everything to warn you in secret? The evening dragged forward. Mallory prowled the dining room, shaking hands with the elite guests, ignoring Ethan entirely. Claire kept her distance now, focusing on other tables, but Ethan caught the fleeting glance she dared throw his way. There was fear in it, but also defiance. When the check arrived, nearly $900 for the meal, Mallory himself carried it, smirking. I trust everything was satisfactory? Ethan slipped his black card across the folder without a word. Mallory's smirk faltered for half a breath before he masked it. He didn't recognize the name embossed in gold. He wouldn't, not yet. Of course, sir. I'll process this immediately. Ethan nodded. Do that. As he rose from the table, tucking the folded napkin deep into his jacket, he knew this evening was only the beginning. Claire's 4 words had cracked something open, something dangerous. And by morning, he would have answers. Outside on Michigan Avenue, Ethan pulled the wool cap lower over his brow. The city lights glittered against the river, and the Sterling ox loomed behind him like a fortress of lies. In his pocket, the napkin burned against his palm. Tomorrow he would return, not as a ragged stranger, but as a ghost in the walls. And he would uncover the truth about Victor Mallory's ledger. The wind coming off Lake Michigan cut sharp and cold, but Ethan barely noticed as he walked the dark streets back to his penthouse. The napkin was still in his pocket, folded and refolded until the paper edges had worn soft against his fingers. He could not stop replaying Claire's handwriting in his mind, those 4 words like a detonator waiting to explode. They're watching. The kitchen is unsafe. By the time he reached the glass-walled tower that overlooked the glittering skyline, his disguise felt heavier than ever. He stripped the thrift clothes off like old skin and let them drop to the marble floor of his penthouse entryway. The city stretched beneath him, neon lights against black water, but his thoughts were trapped in the dim back corner of the Sterling ox. Claire's face lingered with him, the exhaustion that couldn't erase her kindness, the way her hands trembled when she set down the napkin. People rarely risked themselves for a stranger. For her to do so meant the danger was deeper, sharper than she let on. Ethan poured a glass of scotch and dialed a number. It rang only once. Richard, Ethan said, his voice low. His COO's tone was already edged with caution. What did you find this time? Another waiter who sneered at you? You can't keep running around in disguises expecting to solve the world's hypocrisy. This isn't about hypocrisy. It's about poison. Richard fell silent for a beat. Go on. Ethan told him about the napkin, the warning, the mention of Mallory's ledger. The words felt strange aloud, like speaking them might summon something dangerous into the room. Richard cursed under his breath. I've told you for months his numbers were too clean. The supply costs, the margins, he was hiding something. But if this is true, it's worse than I thought. Tomorrow night, Ethan said. We go in. Quietly. Richard hesitated. We. I'm not sending someone else to do this. It's my name on those doors, my empire. If Mallory is poisoning the supply chain, it ends with me. There was another pause, then Richard's resigned sigh. Fine. But if you're going in, you'll need someone who knows how to ghost a place without leaving prints. I already have someone in mind, Ethan said. Naomi Sloan had been an enigma since the day Ethan met her. A British-born security consultant, calm-eyed and sharp as a scalpel. She carried herself like someone who had seen both palaces and war zones and no longer believed in the illusion of safety. She answered Ethan's call on the second ring. You don't usually call at midnight, she said, voice smooth and cool. This isn't usual. When he explained, she didn't sound surprised. If he's running contaminated shipments, there will be records, digital and physical. But you'll never get them through official audits. Not if he's laundering through shell accounts. You'll need me inside. Tomorrow night, Ethan confirmed. Mallory's office. "I'll bring my kit," Naomi said simply, as if breaking into a fortress of secrets were no different than making tea. The next evening, Ethan donned a new disguise. Not the threadbare thrift clothes of a drifter, but the uniform of invisibility, a janitor's gray overalls, cap pulled low, the kind of worker guests never noticed. He moved through the back corridors of the Sterling Ox with a mop bucket rolling at his side. Richard followed, muttering about liability, though his crisp suit and polished shoes made him look more like a misplaced accountant than an accomplice. Naomi led them both, her stride confident, eyes mapping every camera, every blind spot. "This way," she murmured. Mallory's office is above the wine cellar. 2 locked doors, 1 keypad. Ethan's pulse thudded, but he kept his expression steady. It had been years since he felt this alive, not at board meetings, not in negotiations, but here in the quiet thrill of uncovering a lie. They reached the keypad. Naomi knelt, unzipping a slim black case. Tiny tools gleamed inside, picks, bypass devices, a portable screen with shifting code. Her hands moved with surgical precision. In less than a minute, the lock clicked open. Mallory's office was a shrine to false grandeur. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, framed photos with smiling politicians and business leaders. But the air smelled of stale cigars and something sour beneath. "Shut the door," Naomi instructed. "Richard, watch the hall." Ethan approached the desk. A ledger lay in the center, bound in black leather. His name embossed in gold on the cover, the Sterling Ox, quarterly inventory. He opened it, pages filled with neat columns, shipments in and out, margins polished clean. Too clean. "Look here," Naomi said from the computer, her fingers flying across keys. She had bypassed the password in seconds, her screen flooding with spreadsheets, encrypted files, offshore account numbers. "Do you see this? He's double-booking shipments. The official inventory matches what you'd expect. But there's a shadow system underneath. Contaminated meat, redirected funds. Money funneled through Shell Core in Nevada, then overseas." Ethan's jaw clenched. "How long?" "Years." Richard swore under his breath. "And you wonder why profits looked so good." Then Naomi froze the screen on a video file. "You need to see this." The footage showed Claire in the back office, her apron wrinkled, face pale. Mallory stood over her, smile like a blade. His voice carried clearly through the speakers. "You owe me, Claire. 5,000. Don't forget it. You don't want me talking to the police about what you signed, do you? That little brother of yours, he needs his medicine, doesn't he? Keep your mouth shut, or I'll make sure he doesn't get it." Ethan felt something twist deep in his chest. He had walked into that restaurant expecting to test for kindness, for honesty. Instead, he found a young woman trapped in a vice of fear and corruption. "We have enough," Richard said grimly. "This is fraud, blackmail, food safety violations. The FBI will bury him." "Not yet," Ethan replied. His voice was low, dangerous. "First, I want to see him choke on the truth." As Naomi copied files onto a flash drive, footsteps echoed in the hall. Heavy, deliberate. The door handle rattled. Mallory's voice cut through the silence. "Who the hell's in my office?" Ethan's blood surged. Naomi snapped the laptop shut, motioning them to hide. Richard muttered something about impending prison sentences. Ethan slipped into the shadows behind the door as it creaked open. Mallory stepped inside, muttering curses. His cologne filled the room, sharp and chemical. He dropped a folder on the desk, flipping through papers, oblivious to the 3 intruders holding their breath in silence. Naomi's hand hovered near her case. One wrong move and Mallory would find them. Then, as suddenly as he entered, Mallory grabbed the folder and stormed out again, slamming the door behind him. His footsteps faded down the hall. Ethan exhaled, pulse hammering in his ears. We're done here. Get everything you can, Naomi. Within minutes, the flash drive was filled with ledgers, accounts, and video evidence. Naomi tucked it into her jacket, cool as if nothing had happened. As they slipped out the back corridors, Ethan knew the game had changed. Mallory wasn't just a corrupt manager, he was a predator. And Claire had been his prey for far too long. The next morning, Ethan sat in his penthouse with Richard and Naomi, reviewing the files. Every detail was damning: falsified invoices, offshore laundering, shipments from shuttered plants known for contamination. Enough to bring federal agencies crashing down on Mallory's head. But Ethan didn't just want Mallory punished. He wanted him exposed, before the very people he had manipulated, before the staff he had crushed beneath his thumb. He wanted Claire to see her chains broken in daylight. Tonight, Ethan said, we go back. And this time, Mallory faces everyone. At the Sterling Ox, Claire dragged herself through another shift. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, her body aching from double duty, but her thoughts spun endlessly around the napkin she had given the stranger. Had he read it? Had she doomed herself by reaching out? Mallory had been watching her more closely all night, his smile tighter, his threats unspoken but hovering. She carried trays with steady hands, but her mind screamed with fear. If Mallory discovered what she had done, Liam would pay the price. Yet some stubborn part of her clung to hope, that maybe, just maybe, the stranger hadn't been an ordinary man. And she was right. Because at that very moment, Ethan Caldwell was walking through the restaurant doors again, this time not in rags, not in disguise, but in the tailored suit of the Empire's owner. Heads turned. The hostess nearly stumbled over her own words. Mallory's smile faltered as recognition spread across the dining room. The billionaire chairman had returned. As Claire froze with a tray in her hands, Ethan's eyes met hers across the room. He gave the smallest nod, silent but certain. Tonight, everything will change. If you've made it this far, this story moved you, and that means it matters. Please subscribe, like and share now, my lovely viewers. Your support helps us share stories that need to be told. Someone out there is waiting to hear the next one. The dining room of the Sterling Ox was hushed in a way it had never been before. Crystal glasses paused mid-air, laughter stuttered into silence. Every head turned toward the entrance where Ethan Caldwell stood, immaculate in a charcoal suit, cufflinks glinting like sparks. Gone was the thrift store jacket, the threadbare flannel. Tonight, he was the man the city knew, billionaire, chairman of Blackwood Holdings, a fortune worth nearly $10 billion, walking on polished leather shoes. Claire's heart slammed in her chest. She nearly dropped the tray of cocktails in her hands. The stranger at the corner table last night, the man she had trusted with her desperate warning, was him. The billionaire owner disguised. The chairman of the Empire. Mallory froze for the briefest of moments, his mask slipping. Then he plastered on his familiar grin and strode forward. Mr. Caldwell. What an unexpected honor. Ethan didn't smile. Victor. The air around them was taut, like an orchestra waiting for the first thunderous note. Mallory gestured to the best table in the house, the one reserved for governors and magnates. Ethan ignored it. Instead, his gaze swept the room, staff lined rigid at their stations, guests whispering behind linen napkins, Claire standing trembling at the edge of the crowd. Finally, Ethan moved. Not to the table, but to the center of the dining floor. He spoke loud enough for every corner to hear. I came here last night, he said evenly, disguised in thrift store clothes. I ordered the $500 Emperor's Cut steak. The cheapest beer on the menu. Most of you sneered. Most of you looked at me and saw trash. The words dropped heavy in the silence. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Staff glanced nervously at Mallory. But one of you, Ethan continued, his eyes on Claire, treated me with dignity. And then risked everything to slip me a note. Claire's knees weakened. The napkin. The warning. The room seemed to tilt around her as Mallory's head snapped toward her, fury sparking behind his smile. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper. He held it high, his voice sharpening. 4 words. They're watching. The kitchen is unsafe. Gasps rippled through the room. Mallory laughed too loudly. Sir, please, this is absurd. Ethan cut him off. No. What's absurd is the corruption rotting this place from the inside. What's absurd is a manager fabricating debts, blackmailing his staff, and poisoning the supply chain for profit. Murmurs broke out. Guests exchanged horrified looks. Staff stared wide-eyed. Mallory's face darkened, the grin hardening into a snarl. You don't know what you're talking about, Mallory hissed. Ethan snapped his fingers. Naomi Sloan appeared from the crowd like a shadow stepping into light. She carried a slim laptop, already open. With a single click, the restaurant's massive digital display behind the bar flickered. Numbers and ledgers filled the screen, shipments from shuttered plants, duplicate invoices, offshore accounts. Then the video. Mallory's voice filled the restaurant, dripping malice. You owe me, Claire. 5,000. Don't forget it. Your brother needs his medicine, doesn't he? Keep your mouth shut, or I'll make sure he doesn't get it. Claire's face flushed hot with humiliation. Her secret, her burden, laid bare before strangers. But then came the murmurs of anger, of outrage, not at her but at him. Eyes turned on Mallory, not with respect but with disgust. Mallory lunged toward the laptop, but Naomi was faster. She stepped aside, calm as ever. Security staff stirred uncertainly, unsure whether to obey Mallory or their true employer. Enough, Mallory growled. His mask was gone now, replaced by naked rage. You think you can humiliate me? You'll regret this. He reached for Claire, as if to drag her forward as proof of his dominance. But Ethan stepped between them, the weight of power in his stance. Touch her, Ethan said coldly, and you'll be in handcuffs before dessert. The restaurant doors burst open. 2 men in dark suits strode in, federal agents flashing badges. Victor Mallory, one announced. You're under investigation for fraud, blackmail, and violation of federal food safety regulations. The entire dining room erupted in whispers. Mallory's face drained of color. He stammered, tried to protest, but the agents moved swiftly, snapping cuffs onto his wrists. Guests pulled out phones, recording the spectacle. Claire stood frozen, tray forgotten, as Mallory was dragged past her. His eyes burned into hers with venom. This isn't over, he spat. But for the first time, she didn't flinch. When the doors closed behind him, silence settled. Then, applause. Hesitant at first, then swelling. Staff clapped. Guests clapped. Some cheered. And through it all, Ethan stood steady, his gaze locked on Claire. She felt her breath break in her chest. Relief, disbelief, fear, hope, all crashing at once. Her knees buckled, and she had to grab the nearest chair to stay upright. After the chaos subsided, Ethan approached her. He spoke low, only for her. You saved this place. You saved lives. You have nothing to fear anymore. Her lips trembled. You don't understand. My brother, Liam, he still needs. I know, Ethan said gently. And I'll make sure he gets everything he needs. Her eyes widened. Why? Why would you do that? Ethan looked at her the way a drowning man looks at a lifeline. Because you reminded me what integrity looks like. Something I'd almost forgotten. But even as hope stirred, tension sharpened. The FBI agents weren't done. They returned to the dining room, informing Ethan that the scandal would not end quietly. Federal investigations meant press storms, shareholder panic, vultures circling his empire. Richard leaned close, voice low. We'll have lawsuits by morning. Stock collapse if this hits the media wrong. This could cost billions. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we tell the story ourselves. The truth. Before anyone else does. That night, Claire found herself not in the shadows of the kitchen, but seated in the back of a sleek black car, riding with Ethan and Naomi to Blackwood Tower. The city lights blurred past as she stared at her frayed shoes against the leather floor mats. She didn't belong here. She couldn't. Naomi studied her quietly. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. Claire shook her head. "I'm just a waitress trying to keep my brother alive." Naomi's eyes glinted. Heroes aren't always in the spotlight. The words settled in Claire's chest like a seed taking root. At Blackwood Tower, Ethan convened an emergency meeting. Screens lit with charts, ledgers, evidence. Claire sat small at the edge of the vast conference table, feeling the weight of billion-dollar decisions unfolding around her. But every time she shrank, Ethan's gaze pulled her back, as if anchoring her there. "We're not hiding this," Ethan told the board. "We're exposing it. Publicly. And Claire will stand beside me when we do." The board erupted in protest. "She's a liability. She forged documents under Mallory's orders. She's uneducated, inexperienced." Ethan's voice cut through like steel. "She is the only reason this company still has a soul." Silence. Claire's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken for her like that. No one had ever called her anything but a burden, a servant, a girl drowning in debt. Now, for the first time, she felt seen. If you were in Ethan's shoes, risking billions, your reputation, your empire, would you stand by Claire, or let her take the fall to protect yourself? The next day, headlines blazed. Toxic meat scandal rocks Sterling Ox. Undercover millionaire exposes own manager. Waitress note saves customers from poison supply. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Claire's face spread across networks, her name whispered as the whistleblower waitress. Some praised her courage. Others speculated about ulterior motives. The scrutiny was suffocating. At the hospital, Liam watched from his bed, an oxygen tube at his nose. His frail hands clutched hers. "You did it, Claire. You really did it." She forced a smile through tears. "I don't know what I did, Lee. I couldn't stay quiet." "And you didn't," he said, voice weak but proud. "You saved us." Her heart ached with love for him, for everything she had sacrificed, every night she had cried in silence. Maybe, just maybe, it hadn't been in vain. But the storm wasn't over. That night, Ethan received a message from Naomi. An encrypted file, hidden deeper than the rest. She called him to her office, her expression grave. "There's more," she said. Mallory wasn't working alone. "Look at this." On the screen, payments flowing from accounts tied to Mallory, straight into the hands of a criminal syndicate operating across state lines. Not just fraud. Not just contaminated meat. Organized crime. Ethan's stomach sank. The fight was bigger than he imagined. And if Mallory had allies, Claire's warning might have put her in more danger than either of them realized. Ethan turned from the glowing screen to Claire, who sat small and trembling in Naomi's office. She whispered, "If they know I spoke out, they'll come for me. They'll come for Liam." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Then they'll have to come through me first." The storm outside Chicago's skyline mirrored the one brewing inside Ethan Caldwell's chest. Lightning fractured the sky above Blackwood Tower as thunder rolled, deep and resonant. Ethan stood at the glass wall of his penthouse office, staring down at the restless city. Naomi's discovery burned in his mind. Mallory hadn't been a lone wolf. He was only a link in a chain that reached into the shadows of organized crime. Behind him, Naomi's voice was low but steady. "The money trails don't lie." Mallory funneled profits to an outfit in Gary, Indiana. They've been laundering through trucking companies for years. If Mallory's gone down, they'll be looking to protect themselves. And they'll see Claire as a liability. Ethan turned. His eyes found Claire sitting on the leather sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. The weight of everything that had happened, Mallory's threats, the public exposure, her brother's fragile health, seemed to collapse onto her shoulders all at once. She looked smaller than ever, a shadow of the defiant waitress who had slipped him that napkin. But Ethan also saw the fire in her, even dimmed by fear. He crossed the room, kneeling before her so she couldn't look away. "Claire, you're not alone in this. Do you hear me? Whatever comes, you have me." Her voice broke. "They'll hurt Liam. If they know I spoke out, he's their easiest target. I can't." "You won't lose him," Ethan said, steel in his tone. "I swear it." Richard entered then, his expression grim, a folder clutched in his hand. "We've already had calls from journalists. Whispers that Mallory's ties go beyond corruption. If this leaks the wrong way, stockholders will panic, regulators will tear us apart, and your name will be dragged through hell, Ethan. Billions could vanish overnight." Ethan rose slowly, shoulders squared. Billions can be rebuilt. But integrity can't. If we hide this, we're no better than Mallory. Richard slammed the folder onto the desk. "This isn't just about Mallory. These men, this syndicate, they play dirtier than anyone you've faced in a boardroom. You expose them, they'll retaliate. And they won't just come after you. They'll come after her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire's hands trembled in her lap. She whispered, barely audible, maybe I should just disappear. If I go away, if I stop fighting, maybe they'll leave Liam alone." Ethan's fury erupted, not at her but at the very thought. "No. Don't you dare. You're not disappearing. You've already been invisible for too long. You slipped me that napkin because you believed the truth mattered. Don't stop believing now." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm so tired." "I know," Ethan said softly. "But sometimes the most tired souls are the ones who change the world." The following night, the plan took shape. Naomi had tracked a meeting between the syndicate's mid-level enforcers and a sterling ox supplier. A warehouse on the south side, midnight. Dangerous ground, but also their best chance to catch the operation red-handed. Richard argued bitterly against it. "This isn't your fight, Ethan. Call the feds and let them handle it." Ethan shook his head. "Mallory's ledger is mine. My restaurant, my name. If I sit in my penthouse while others risk themselves, then I deserve every accusation they throw at me." Naomi's lips curved faintly. "Besides, the feds won't move without airtight evidence. We need something undeniable. And the warehouse is where we'll find it." Claire had been silent through the planning, pale and stiff in her chair. When Ethan finally looked at her, she met his gaze with surprising steadiness. "If you're going," she said, "then so am I." "Absolutely not," Ethan snapped. "You don't get to decide for me," she shot back. "This started because of me. If I don't see it through, if I don't face them, I'll never sleep another night in peace." The silence that followed was thick with shock. Even Naomi tilted her head, studying Claire with new respect. Ethan's anger softened into reluctant admiration. The fragile waitress wasn't fragile at all. She was steel-wrapped in exhaustion. Finally, he nodded. "Then we go together." The warehouse crouched like a beast at the edge of the city, rain lashing its corrugated metal sides. Naomi led the way, dressed in black, a compact camera and lock picks at her hip. Ethan and Claire followed, hearts pounding in the dark. Through a cracked door, they saw the meeting unfold. Crates stacked high, men in leather jackets unloading boxes marked with false labels. At the center, a tall man with a scar splitting his cheek barked orders. Bundles of cash exchanged hands. Naomi whispered, "That's them. The syndicate Mallory fed." She raised her camera, capturing every detail. But then Claire's breath caught. One of the men held a file. Her name was scrawled across the front. She saw the words even from a distance. Claire Donovan, liability. Ethan felt her tense beside him. He steadied her arm, his jaw set. They're targeting you. We end this tonight. But their luck shattered when a guard at the back caught sight of the trio. His shout pierced the air. Guns snapped up. Men surged forward. Run! Naomi hissed. They bolted, feet splashing in puddles as bullets cracked against metal walls. Claire stumbled, Ethan pulling her forward with iron strength. Naomi dropped behind them, firing a stun round that sparked against a stack of crates, buying seconds. They burst through a side door into the storm, rain soaking their clothes, breath ragged. Tires screeched, Richard's car waiting, engine roaring. They dove inside as shots echoed behind them. The car peeled into the night, the warehouse shrinking in the rearview mirror. Claire collapsed against Ethan's chest, shaking uncontrollably. He wrapped his arms around her, rage and protectiveness burning like fire. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe now." But Naomi's eyes in the rearview were grim. "No. It's not over. Not until they're exposed. And after tonight, they know who we are." Hours later, drenched and trembling, they regrouped at Blackwood Tower. Naomi uploaded the footage to encrypted drives, every detail of the syndicate's dealings preserved. Richard paced like a man at the edge of a cliff. "This is madness," he barked. "Do you realize what happens when billion-dollar corporations get tied to organized crime? Do you realize what happens to shareholders, to our empire, to everything we've built?" Ethan faced him squarely. "This isn't about billions anymore. This is about right and wrong." Richard's voice cracked. "And what about her?" He gestured at Claire, who sat pale and silent, her damp hair clinging to her cheeks. "She's already marked. Do you really think exposing these men will protect her?" Ethan looked at Claire. She met his gaze, fear and defiance warring in her eyes. And in that moment, his decision crystallized. "We don't hide her," Ethan said. "We elevated her. We show the world she isn't a victim. She's the reason this corruption was exposed. We put her where everyone can see her. Because in the light, they can't touch her." Claire's lips parted, shock flashing across her face. "You'd do that? For me?" "For you," Ethan said simply, "and for Liam. And for every employee who's ever been silenced by fear." The next morning, Ethan held a press conference unlike any the city had seen. Cameras crowded the marble steps of Blackwood Tower, reporters shouting, microphones thrust forward. The storm had passed, but tension hung thick in the air. Ethan stepped to the podium, Claire at his side. She wore a borrowed blazer over her waitress uniform, her cracked shoes hidden behind the podium, her trembling hands gripping the edge. Naomi stood close, a quiet sentinel. Richard lingered behind, still wary but unwilling to abandon his friend now. Ethan's voice rang out, strong and unflinching. "Last week, I walked into my own restaurant disguised in thrift store clothes. I wanted to see how people would treat a man they thought had nothing. What I found was not just cruelty or kindness, it was corruption. Deep, dangerous corruption." Reporters leaned forward. Cameras flashed. "This woman," Ethan continued, resting a steady hand on Claire's shoulder, "is the reason you know the truth. Claire Donovan risked everything to speak out. And because of her courage, we have uncovered a criminal enterprise poisoning the supply chain, laundering millions, and blackmailing employees." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. Ethan's voice hardened. "Victor Mallory has been arrested. His accomplices will follow. And let me make this clear, Blackwood Holdings will fund a full investigation, cooperate with federal authorities, and ensure no employee ever faces what Claire endured. Effective immediately, she will serve as Director of Ethical Practices for this company." The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras blazed. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Director. Ethical practices. From waitress to executive, in one heartbeat. But even as the applause swelled, Naomi leaned close, her voice low enough only Ethan could hear. The syndicate won't forgive this. They'll come for blood. Ethan's eyes didn't waver. He glanced at Claire beside him, trembling but unbroken, and then at the sea of flashing cameras. Then let them try, he whispered. Across town, in a smoke-filled back room, syndicate leaders watched the press conference unfold on a flickering television. Their faces were masks of cold fury. One man stubbed out his cigar, voice like gravel. She thinks she's safe in the spotlight. Let's remind her she isn't. That night, Claire lay awake in the guest suite of Ethan's penthouse, the city glittering beyond the glass. Liam slept in the next room, his oxygen machine humming softly. She should have felt safe, protected. But dread gnawed at her. She could still feel Mallory's venomous eyes, hear the crack of gunfire at the warehouse, and imagine faceless men plotting revenge in the dark. A soft knock at her door broke her thoughts. Ethan stood there, tie loosened, fatigue etched into his features. He hesitated at the threshold. "I know you can't sleep either," he said quietly. She shook her head. "It doesn't feel real. Yesterday I was just a waitress. Today I'm standing on a podium in front of the world." Ethan stepped inside, his gaze tender but weighed with sorrow. "You deserve more than worn-out shoes and endless shifts, Claire. You deserve to be heard. You've given me something I didn't even know I'd lost, belief. In people. In honesty. In courage." Her throat tightened. "And what if the syndicate comes for me? What if Liam?" "They'll go through me first," Ethan said firmly. The silence stretched between them, fragile and electric. Claire's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. For the first time in years, she felt something deeper than fear pressing at her chest, hope. And Ethan, for the first time in years, felt something deeper than wealth or power pressing at his own, belonging. But even as they stood in the quiet of the penthouse, a phone buzzed on the table. Naomi's voice came sharp through the speaker. "They've made their move. Claire's name is already on a hit list. They're coming tonight." The city never slept, but that night, Chicago felt like it was holding its breath. Rain-slicked streets glistened under the orange glow of street lamps, reflecting shards of neon like broken glass. High above, in the penthouse of Blackwood Tower, the air was heavy with dread. Naomi's words still rang like an alarm bell. "They're coming tonight." Claire sat frozen on the edge of the bed, her pulse racing so violently she could hear it in her ears. Liam slept soundly in the adjacent room, unaware of the storm outside and the darker storm approaching. She couldn't bear the thought of him waking to chaos, to danger, to men with guns and merciless eyes. Ethan stood near the balcony doors, shoulders squared, jaw rigid. He had faced cutthroat boardrooms, hostile takeovers, international rivalries, but nothing had prepared him for this. This wasn't about billions. This wasn't about the empire. This was about one woman, one boy, and the cost of protecting them. Naomi's voice crackled through the comms, calm but clipped. 2 SUVs circling the block. Another vehicle parked near the service entrance. "They're testing your defenses, Ethan. We've got maybe 15 minutes before they make their move." Ethan turned, locking eyes with Claire. "Go wake Liam. We need to move." She rose on unsteady legs, every instinct screaming to hide, to vanish, but she obeyed. Within moments she returned, her brother leaning weakly against her side, oxygen machine slung across her shoulder like a desperate lifeline. Liam's wide eyes flicked from Ethan to Naomi's disembodied voice on the speaker. "What's happening?" Ethan crouched before him, gripping the boy's frail shoulders. "We're going somewhere safe. But you have to trust me." Liam nodded, lips trembling. The penthouse erupted in controlled chaos. Naomi guided them toward a service stairwell, her tone sharp, precise. "Move quickly. Do not stop. Don't look back. Richard appeared at the far end of the hall, sweat dampening his shirt. For all his warnings, for all his protests, he was here now, hands shaking but loyal to the end. He carried a duffel bag heavier than it looked, cash, secure phones, and a pistol he prayed he wouldn't have to use. Claire's breath came shallow, every footstep echoing too loudly. Liam clung to her, stumbling, his small body trembling as fear gnawed at his fragile lungs. Ethan steadied him, one arm firm around his shoulders, whispering assurances he barely believed himself. Halfway down the stairwell, the building shuddered with the sound of glass shattering above. Naomi swore under her breath. They're inside. Keep moving. Gunshots cracked faintly, muffled by floors of marble and steel. Claire's throat seized. She wanted to scream, to collapse, but instead she tightened her grip on Liam, pressing his head against her side so he wouldn't see the fear in her eyes. When they burst through a maintenance exit into the underground garage, Naomi was already there, crouched by a sleek black SUV with its engine humming. She threw open the door. Get in. They piled inside. Richard slid behind the wheel, white-knuckled. Naomi climbed in beside him, her laptop open, surveillance feeds flickering across the screen. Ethan pulled Claire and Liam close in the back seat, shielding them with his own body as Richard gunned the engine. The SUV roared to life, tires squealing as it shot out of the garage. But headlights flared ahead. Two black vehicles pulled across the street, blocking their escape. Brace, Naomi snapped. Richard swerved hard, the SUV scraping sparks against a concrete barrier. Claire cried out, arms around Liam as the car jolted violently. Bullets shattered glass somewhere behind them, sparks flashing in the night. Ethan's chest clenched with primal fury. No boardroom negotiation, no billion-dollar contract, had ever felt as raw as this, life or death in the streets of his own city. Naomi returned fire with a compact pistol, controlled bursts that sent the attackers diving for cover. Richard barreled the SUV down an alley, the engine screaming as if it too understood the stakes. Claire buried her face in Liam's hair, whispering over and over, "You're safe. You're safe. You're safe," though her own heart thundered with terror. At last, after what felt like endless minutes of pursuit, Naomi directed them to an old warehouse on the riverfront, an MI6 safehouse she had secured years earlier. It was windowless, fortified, hidden in plain sight. Richard slammed the SUV to a halt inside and the heavy steel doors clanged shut behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's body sagged with exhaustion, trembling hands still clutching Liam. Ethan's arm remained firm around her, his heartbeat a steady drum against her ear. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself a shaky breath. Naomi holstered her weapon, her face carved from stone. They won't stop. Not until they're dismantled. But now we know, they're willing to risk everything. That means they're desperate. And desperation makes men sloppy. Ethan met her gaze. Then we turn their desperation against them. Richard groaned, running a hand through his hair. For God's sake, Ethan, you've already risked your life, her life, the boys. What more do you want? Hand the evidence to the FBI and walk away before you lose everything. Ethan's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. This isn't about everything. It's about her. It's about the truth. And if I don't finish this, then the truth dies in the shadows, just like every victim before Claire. Claire's eyes burned with unshed tears. She had never felt smaller, never felt more vulnerable. But at the same time, she had never felt so seen, so defended. Ethan wasn't fighting for billions anymore. He was fighting for her. The next 48 hours blurred into a relentless storm. Naomi coordinated with federal agents, carefully releasing evidence from Mallory's ledger and the warehouse surveillance. Every leak was timed, every document authenticated, every fact bulletproof. The media frenzy that followed was unstoppable. Words like syndicate, toxic supply chain, and criminal empire blared across every screen. Ethan insisted that Claire stand beside him in every interview, every briefing. Her cracked shoes and tired face became symbols of truth, courage, and justice. Headlines called her the waitress who brought down a syndicate. Strangers on the street sent letters, flowers, prayers. But with the light came shadows. Anonymous threats flooded social media. Men with unmarked cars loitered near the hospital where Liam received treatment. Federal marshals were assigned to protect her, but still, fear was a constant companion. One night, after a press conference that left her drained, Claire stood on the balcony of Blackwood Tower, staring out at the glittering skyline. Ethan joined her, silent at first, just standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I never asked for this," she whispered. "I know. I wanted to keep my head down, work my shifts, pay Liam's bills. That's all. And now," her voice broke. "Now I'm standing in the middle of something I don't even understand." Ethan turned to her, his expression raw. "And yet, you've stood taller than anyone I've ever met." Her breath hitched. "I'm not strong." "Yes, you are," he said firmly. "Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking, and still standing back up." She swallowed hard, her gaze meeting his. "And what about you? You're the billionaire who had everything. Why risk it all for someone like me?" He hesitated, his heart pounding with words he had buried for years. Finally, he whispered, "Because all the billions in the world mean nothing if I can't look at myself in the mirror. And because I found something worth more than everything I own." The air between them shifted, heavy with unspoken truths. Claire's chest tightened. For the first time since slipping him that napkin, she let herself believe, not in miracles, but in the possibility of love. The hammer finally fell 3 weeks later. Federal raids swept through Chicago, Gary, and beyond. Syndicate leaders were dragged out in handcuffs. Accounts were frozen, properties seized. Mallory, already behind bars, cut a deal that sealed the syndicate's fate. Claire watched the news unfold with Liam at her side. Her brother's small hand slipped into hers, his voice hoarse but steady. "You did this, Claire." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "No, Liam. We did this. You gave me the reason to be brave." In the weeks that followed, life began to shift. Ethan announced the creation of the Donovan Medical Trust, a fully funded foundation to cover Liam's treatments and support other families battling rare diseases. Claire, once trapped in endless shifts, stood at the helm of a new division, Director of Ethical Practices, charged with ensuring Blackwood Holdings never repeated the sins of Mallory's regime. Richard, weary but wiser, admitted one evening over scotch, "You were right, Ethan. Integrity can't be bought. But damn, you nearly gave me a heart attack proving it." Naomi, her task complete, prepared to leave Chicago. On her last night, she found Claire in the office, poring over ledgers. She placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. "You remind me of someone I once knew, a young woman who thought she was ordinary until the world forced her to be extraordinary. Don't ever forget, heroes aren't always in the spotlight." Claire smiled faintly. "Neither are guardian angels." Naomi's lips curved. "Take care of him," she said softly, glancing toward Ethan's office. Then she was gone, a shadow disappearing into the night. Months later, the Sterling Ox reopened under new management, its kitchens pristine, its books transparent. On the opening night, Ethan walked through the doors, not in disguise, but as himself. At his side, Claire wore a simple black dress and new shoes, her hand resting lightly in his. Liam, stronger every day, grinned at the staff who once looked through his sister like she was invisible. They ordered the same dish that had started it all, the $500 Emperor's cut steak. When it arrived, Ethan raised his glass. "To tell the truth," he said. Claire's eyes glistened as she clinked her glass against his. "To courage." Liam, his voice thin but determined, lifted his water. "To family." The restaurant erupted in applause, strangers cheering, Staff smiling, cameras flashing. For once, Ethan didn't mind being seen. For once, Claire didn't feel small. They had walked through fire, through fear, through shadows, and they had come out whole. The billionaire who had once hidden in thrift store clothes had found what he was missing. The waitress who once thought she was invisible had become a symbol of justice. And together, against every odd, they had found not only victory, but love. Weeks later, an unmarked envelope arrived at Blackwood Tower. Inside was a single napkin, folded neatly. For words scrawled across it in rough handwriting, "This isn't over yet." Claire unfolded the napkin, her hands trembling, and looked at Ethan. His expression hardened, not with fear, but with determination. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "Don't forget to subscribe and share for more heartwarming stories like this."